Welcome to this edition of Atlanta Live. I'm Ann White, and today we're going to be talking with a very special guest who has written a book about raising kids, and she's also a frugal expert. Join me in welcoming Sami Cohn, author of Raising Uncommon Kids. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and I have really enjoyed getting to hear more about your book. I want to hear more about it today, of course, and share with our audience how you came to that. But let's talk a little bit about your background. You're in Nashville. You do a radio show, and you have a real heart. So let's go start there with the frugal expert. And how did you become the frugal expert?
You know, I lived it. You know, I had a father that was born during the Great Depression, first generation American. My parents got divorced at an early age. So really, I don't know any different. And it wasn't until we moved to Nashville about 7 years ago when my best friend was the one that said, people don't know what you know. You know, we believe that everyone knows what we know, right? And sometimes it takes someone from the outside saying, what you have is unique, or what you say is unique. And so I just really started passing along what was given to me. You know, my mentor, Jackie Kendall, said, we're called to be like the Red Sea, not the Dead Sea. If something is poured into us, it has to pour out of us. So that's really where it started. It's just all the tips that have been passed on to me over the years, things that I had to do out of necessity many times, that I wanted to be able to share with people, and that's where it's grown into TV, radio, and more.
That is awesome. So give us a few tips from your frugal experts. Now you're on a morning show on the radio.
I am.
And you also have a large blog following. And tell our audience how they can follow you on the blogs as well. And what kind of tips that you give on a daily basis?
Well, my blog is my name, SamiCone.com. It's SAMICONE. And then I have my own radio show called the Family Money Minute. And you can go to FamilyMoneyMinute.com to see a list of over 250 stations that it's on across the country. But really, to me, it's not about how to get, you know, 50 boxes of free macaroni and cheese, or, you know, couponing has kind of gotten a bad rap these days. It's about rethinking why you do what you do, how you spend what you have, and really that is kind of what the book is about as well. But when you're talking about money, it's really about knowing what you have in front of you. So many of us don't even realize what's coming in every month and what's going out every month. And so really just getting on the same page with whoever you're living with, whether that's a roommate, whether that's a spouse, and saying, okay, let's track what we have. If you haven't done anything, because budget scares people sometimes, track what you have for a week. How much are you spending at Starbucks? How much are you spending on your kids' lunches? How much are you spending on shoes? You know, or clothing. Sometimes we just don't know. We throw out the credit card. So just draw a line in the sand for yourself and say, you know, for a day we're going to spend just cash, or for a week we're going to track everything in a paper envelope. Don't go out and buy expensive software, but you have to know what you're dealing with before you can start planning on how to save.
You know, you're so right, and that's great advice, because in today's world, we're using plastic all the time. We don't keep up with what we're spending. And when I have cash and I have it for the week, I know when I've gone through it.
Exactly.
You know? But even now today, I mean, do you tell us not to use our phones to pay with? Do you have any advice there? Because there's so many different ways to pay.
For me, it's not about a certain method. I mean, a lot of experts say that, but you're not, what works for me isn't necessarily what's going to work for you. So to me, I try to present a lot of different ideas and say, try them and see what works for you. Because if it doesn't click, you're not going to keep doing it. It's like a diet. You might do it for a week or a month, but it's not going to be something that stays. And when we're talking about budget, and not just building wealth, but being able to give back, you need to do something that's lasting that you can model for your own children as well. So to me, it's just even small changes. Like instead of traveling on spring break, why not save that money and travel on an off week when not everyone else is going, and when it's sometimes, you know, 75% cheaper for airfare and hotels, or, you know, just even when you grocery shop. I recommend that people grocery shop in the morning right after they eat. You can get in and out of the store faster. You're not as tempted to buy things that are junky.
You're hungry for.
Right, and you get the best, you know, choice of produce and meat. So sometimes it's just those little tweaks that you need to start out with to, you know, build up your confidence and say, I can do this, and just start cutting back gradually so that you can still enjoy the things that you want to enjoy, but not waste money on the silly things that, like you said, you're doing the Apple Pay or grabbing your plastic for.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about your newest book, Raising Uncommon Kids. And I think there's so much great advice for all of us in here, but you're also saying that you've incorporated this frugal advice in here as well. And I know your book is based on Colossians 3.
It is.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that scripture and why that scripture was important to you and why it's so important to the points in this book.
Well, you know, and some people are surprised, like, why is the frugal expert writing a parenting book? And I'm quick to say it's not a parenting book. It's really a mirror that we turn on ourselves as parents. I think that's the problem with society today, is that we want this quick fix for our kids, right? Oh, our kids are selfish. They're doing something wrong. Really, a lot of times they're getting it from us as their parents, grandparents, teachers.
Right.
So this all stemmed out of a moment I had with my daughter 4 years ago where I was putting her to bed. She was 7 years old, and I felt like she was being incredibly selfish. I mean, I literally wanted to shake her, you know, by the shoulders. And so I left the room before I said or did something I was going to regret.
Good.
And I literally fell to my knees. And I don't often hear God speak, but I said, God, you have got to give me a word, something. And he planted this fable in my head. And I went back to my daughter's bedside and I told her this fable, and it had stemmed, the selfishness had stemmed from our compassion child that we sponsor. And I had been telling her, you know, Gabrielle doesn't have food to eat. Didn't touch her. Gabrielle's parents don't live at home. She's raised by her grandparents. Didn't faze her. Gabrielle doesn't get to go to school. Like, nothing that I thought mattered to my daughter.
Right.
So I go back into my daughter's room and I start telling her the story about how Gabrielle doesn't have pajamas. You would have thought her world had ended. She sat up in her bed and was like, Gabrielle doesn't have pajamas? What do you mean? I was like, doesn't matter that she doesn't have food or her parents, but she doesn't have pajamas, because to my daughter, her pajamas make her feel like a superhero. It's the first thing she does when she comes home from school.
She can relate now.
Yeah, so it clicked in me that, you know what, I've got to get to know my child, not just impose my beliefs and impose my heart. I have to get to know her and do this a little bit backwards. So just like with my giving, most of it, if you think about it as adults, is done in private. You know, I tithe online for our church. When I volunteer, it's typically me volunteering, right? They don't see the generosity that I'm doing. So this all stemmed from realizing I've got to do things differently as a parent and as a human being if I ever hope for it to trickle down to my children. And that's when I really prayed and asked God to show me. And all of these characteristics come from Colossians 3, verses 12 through 17. And they're godly characteristics.
Absolutely, they are. And they do make a difference. Now, you've got a quote in your book: before we can raise uncommon kids, we have to be uncommon ourselves. And that's what you've just said.
Right.
That means everything you've heard about living in the world, but not being in it.
Right.
And then some.
Right.
Speak to that quote.
Well, you know, we can't just live in a bubble. I mean, there's times where I feel like, I often feel like I just want to hide away. I want to crawl in a hole. It's too overwhelming, right?
We all do. Our
kids feel the same way. So let's not take these 12 characteristics and go home and say, okay, kids, we're going to be more loving and generous and selfless and gentle. It's overwhelming. Let's start with the root. Compassion is actually the last characteristic I talk about in the book. The last one, because we can't expect our kids to care about someone they don't know halfway across the world if we don't first teach them what it means to love, that love comes from God, and how to show that love to the people within the four walls of our home. They're our parents, right? Their siblings. And so I've divided the book into 3 sections, and it starts with your heart at home, moves on to your attitude towards others, and then looks at your influence in the world.
Right. And you've also got tips, I think, at the end of each chapter.
Yes.
You've got tips in this book. So this is a very practical, very usable book.
Well, and hopefully, like I said, hopefully even without kids, you'll find value, because it's characteristics that we all want to model, that we all want to live out every day. And so my goal was to write something that was easy to read and that was practical, because nothing drives me more nuts than reading a book and thinking, yes, I love that, I believe it, and then not knowing what to do. So just like I was talking about with the frugal tips about giving different ideas and you making it your own, at the end of every chapter I have a Make It Practical section with 5 or 6 tips on what to try to actually put that characteristic into practice. And there's a prayer focus, so there's a group of people that you can put it into practice on, whether that's, like I said, parents, siblings, extended family, even neighbors. So this is a usable tool, not just a theory to, you know, sit on your bedside table.
Exactly. You also say that the book is about raising selfless kids in an all-about-me generation. And that is so true. I mean, with the Facebook and all of the social media, it's such a hard world in some ways to raise these children in, because they're technology savvy, and many of them have phones by the time they're teenagers, and they're texting back and forth, and in a lot of times there's a lot of hurt and insecurities
Right.
that come from all of this all about me generation, because it is. There's selfies, there's, so speak to that. Is there some advice for parents on raising those children, which you're right in, your daughter's 11 now,
Right.
and you also have a son,
Right.
and he's
He's
how
10.
old? He's
He's
10.
10,
So you're right in that transition of going into
Right.
those teenage years, and it's really hard sometimes on these young girls and boys to
Absolutely.
live up to the expectations of Facebook.
It is. I mean, obviously I'm a blogger. I love social media, but it's this
Right.
love-hate relationship.
Right.
And, our kids today are caught right in the middle of it. And that's one of the reasons that I address not only different ages of kids in the book, but I have a mentor mom moment in each chapter where mostly women that are in their grandmothering years who have lived this and done that speak to how, they see this perspective and this shift happening. But when you talk about this generation, it's kind of like I was saying, my father was born during the Great Depression. You worked because you had to, not because
Right.
you wanted a new pair of shoes or a new cell phone, right? And our kids today just don't see that. So instead of guilting them and shaming them and embarrassing them as
Right.
we sometimes tend to do because they don't get it, right? We need to help them to see, the need next door, as I call it in the book. And sometimes it's great to help, like I said, sponsor a child across the world.
Right.
But have you ever knocked on your neighbor's door? Have you ever taken your child out? We took our kids and we got lawn chairs and we just moved to a new neighborhood. We sat the two
Yep.
lawn chairs out. We got out lollipops and potato chips because that's what we had in the pantry. And we knocked on our neighbors' doors and just invited them to come meet us and to see, who are you? What can we be
Yep.
doing for you? Is there an elderly neighbor that needs help cleaning? Is there a neighbor that travels a lot that needs help with a pet?
Yep.
Those are things that your kids can help with that doesn't take an application, doesn't take
Right.
a lot of resources, but just making them aware that their world is bigger than themselves.
Yep.
And with teenagers, if they have a phone, great. Tell them to use social media for good. There's so many companies now that if you tweet something, they'll donate, $1 to a child in need or to end hunger. So
Oh.
say, you know what, you can have your phone back, but for a week, I want you to only to tweet about a cause that you care about, or only Instagram, pictures about people in need and share their story before you share your story. So it's really about, again, turning that mirror and helping them to realize that, there's another world out there just besides your needs.
You're so right, Sammy. We live in a world today where we don't get together with our neighbors. Half the time we don't
Right.
even know our neighbors
Right.
because we live in this fast-paced lifestyle. Most often both parents work, the kids are at school, they come home, sometimes they come home before the parents
Right.
do, and it's just a challenging society for some of us,
It
you know,
is.
to live in. And so I think your advice of stop, take a minute, get to know your kids, get to know your neighbors, and help them know that there are people out here that are different than them.
Yeah, and that's why the practical side of this was so important to me. I have more tips at raisinguncommonkids.com, but little things like even extended family. Most of us don't live close to our extended family anymore.
Right.
And so we started doing a prayer poster where literally every day of the week we have a different prayer focus. One day it's my extended family, next day it's my husband's extended family, one day it's school, nation. And what we did when our kids were little, we literally took a poster board. It wasn't pretty, right? Because you want your kids to be involved with
Right.
it. We literally drew columns and then we just cut out pictures of cousins, aunts and uncles that they don't see except maybe Thanksgiving every other year. And we wanted them to really know these people. And so at least once a week, we're praying for them. They're seeing their picture. Now it's evolved into kind of more of a spreadsheet that is, in the kitchen. But it again, it doesn't matter what it is, just that you're doing it. We have a prayer shield that we've developed where every day of the week we're praying for someone different, and on that same day of the month, they're praying for our family. So it's little simple
great.
things that, again, let your kids know that we need to be thinking about others, but also know that others are praying for us and thinking about us. It's this two-way street.
It's about that connection.
It is.
And that we often lose, and
Yeah.
our kids often lose.
Right. Instead of lamenting, oh, we live so far away, or oh, we haven't seen this person, you know what? It is what it is. There's
Right.
different seasons in life. Stop lamenting.
Yep.
As my pastor in Florida used to say, suck it up and get tough. Like, do something about it.
Right.
Don't cry about it. Let's
Right.
figure out what we can do to make it work. And you know what? That's what you do. And when you embody that and when you choose joy instead of chasing it,
Absolutely.
then your kids get to see that too. God didn't promise that we'd be without troubles in this life, right? There
Right.
will be troubles. How are you equipping your kids to handle those? Because if you don't do that when they're under your four walls, you're going to have a real tough time once they leave those four walls of your home.
Absolutely, and you're teaching your kids to be courageous. Courageous
Yes.
in their faith,
Right.
and courageous in the way that they look at the world and the way that they
Right.
look at themselves. And I think
Right.
that's so important because often when we focus so much on ourselves and our
Right.
kids focus on ourselves, it actually leads to insecurities.
Yeah,
You
it's
know?
true. Well, I almost lost my marriage 3 years ago.
Oh,
and
goodness.
and that's really where this book came out of, in a time where I thought I was losing everything. The
Yep.
only thing I knew what to do was to share this message and to write this
Wow.
message. And so our kids, in an age appropriate way, have seen that evolve. And even just because this Valentine's Day was a 3-year anniversary of that moment, we shared more with them about it, because we don't want to
Right.
hide those difficulties from them.
Absolutely.
But we also don't want to scare them either. So we had another conversation of, remember when Mommy and Daddy were sleeping in separate bedrooms? And remember when we were going to counseling and Mr. Pike? And, well, you were trying to be a better Mommy and Daddy. Yes. But we also made some choices that were not wise. And so we're working to, really help so that you don't go through those. And
Right.
so it's letting your kids see it's okay when you make mistakes. I don't always respond great. The first time I realized I was having an impatience issue
Right.
was when a car pulled out in front of me, and my daughter from the car seat behind me years ago said, "Come on." I was like, well, she's not getting that from
That came
herself.
from somewhere. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's those, again, and just as we
Yeah.
have to put the mirror on ourselves, our kids are such a good mirror.
They are.
Right? To show what we're doing well and sometimes what we're not doing well. So it's important to touch base with your kids and see, what is it,
Yeah.
that's going right, and what is it that you need from me, and here's what I need from you too.
And Sammy, I'm glad you shared that, because I've also come out of a struggling marriage about over the last 3 or 4 years. And of course, our kids are older and we have grandchildren. Our
Right.
boys are in their 20s. And it is so important for our viewers to see us speak transparently,
Yes.
and be vulnerable with that
Yeah.
issue, and be vulnerable with our kids. And even with the people around us,
Yeah.
people in church. Because we often, for years, you walk into church
Exactly.
and say, we've got the perfect marriage, we've got the perfect family, because that's what you expect, everybody expects you to have.
Right.
But it's so much better to just lay it on the altar, lay it on the table, and say, hey, we're a mess, we've got
Yep.
a mess, but we're working on it,
Well, that's it.
and we're getting the help.
And not to wait until it's fixed. I think
Right.
that's the problem, is that sometimes we applaud those that have got it all figured out after they've come through it.
Does that ever happen?
I don't think so.
I don't
I don't
either.
think it does. And
No.
that's the point.
It's a
is
work in progress.
Right. And for people to say, what do you need? I'm like, I'm not okay right now.
Right.
I'm hurting. I'm struggling. And I don't know what I need. But just to say that, because if you keep it in, or worse, if you try to act like nothing's wrong,
Right.
then you've got, a deeper issue. And that doesn't mean having a little pity party, but it's saying, this is what I'm working on, or this is what I need, or this is what I don't need.
Right.
When we were going through that, we had to tell our extended family for a while, look, we're not shutting you out, we're shutting us in. We are committed to making this work, but we have to fix this before we can include this. And that can be hurtful sometimes, but it's also what we needed in order to save our family.
Right.
And so your kids need to know what's age appropriate for them, so that they can be on board, whether it's just trying to be more loving, whether it's trying to be more generous. Involve your family. I talk about having a family mission statement. And that can be as simple as
Excellent.
just asking your kids, what do you want to be known for? What do you want our family to be known for? Go around the dinner table and say, give us 3 characteristics. Work that into a sentence, because businesses can't succeed without a mission statement.
Right.
Why do we expect our families to?
Wow, what a powerful statement.
Thank you.
That is absolutely awesome. And you're right. Our kids need to see reality, because they're going to be in our shoes someday,
Right.
God willing, and then they're going to be able to say, you know what, marriage is not perfect, but it can be worth fighting for.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. This is an
Pleasure.
incredible book. Can't wait to share it with the audience and share it with myself and my sons at home
you.
and their families. Raising Uncommon Kids by Sami Cohn. You're going to want to make sure you go out and get this. So Sami, tell our audience how they can get this book and they can follow you and read your daily, weekly blogs.
Yes, absolutely. You can get all of that at SamiCohn.com, or just go to RaisingUncommonKids.com. I've got free resources there as well, or on Instagram or Twitter at @SamiCohn.
You're not going to want to miss doing that. And thank you so much for being with us. Sami, thanks for being with
you.
us
My
today.